Hi, everyone. This is Phil Travis, and this announcement is for History 458 here at EOU. It's week 6. We're moving on. These terms really move fast, but we're halfway through. Everybody submitted your paper proposal, I hope, this last Sunday at the latest. I will get those graded this week. Very excited to see what everybody's paper proposals are looking like. I had a few questions this week about, do you have to use primary sources? No, you do not have to use primary sources. Good academic secondary materials, academic monographs, journal articles, and these types of things are fine. Though there is a pretty good amount of primary source material out there on the topic. I know at least one of the students was emailing me a question, and I forwarded a link to the Lincoln Library, which located in Illinois, has a number of digitized primary source documents. So certainly using primary source documents is fantastic, but you don't have to use primary source documents. You can rely on secondary. As long as it's legitimate academic scholarly material, you can rely on secondary materials for this class. And of course, there are numerous just troves of documents in the American Civil War and books and articles and so forth. And of course, there's also the memoirs of everyone from Ulysses S. Grant, Abraham Lincoln, and so forth that can be used as well as primary sources. In some cases, those can be primary sources depending on the book you're referring to. So I'll take a look at those proposals soon, and I'll get them graded soon. This week we are reading from Battle Cry of Freedom, chapter 14 and 15. We have our test this week, our midterm exam, and this is going to be primarily related to the factoid for this week. As we get into like the sort of early middle portion of the war, we'll be looking at the year 1862. Of course, the beginning phases of the Civil War were periods where, particularly in areas like Virginia, the Confederates, particularly those under the leadership of Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and Jeb Stuart, the Army of Virginia, of Northern Virginia, won some very, very significant battles early on, and of course had a great winning spree going early on. And of course, if you are a Confederate soldier, let's say the Confederate government, probably the way you're going to achieve victory, of course, in this war is not by totally defeating the North. You don't possess the capacity to invade the North and totally defeat them. Instead, if you're the Confederates, the way that you are trying to win the war is to win enough victories in a compelling enough fashion so as to force the North to effectively sue for peace and acknowledge the right of the Confederate States of America to exist as an independent nation. That's basically your goal, is to find a way to compel the Lincoln administration into signing a treaty to ensure that that the Confederate States of America would be acknowledged as an independent state. And they hope to do this by winning major battles within or around the vicinity of the northern capital. Of course, in 1863, Gettysburg was an attempt by Lee to win a major battle in relative proximity of the northern capital, Washington, D.C., and thereby sort of encourage, maybe the Union to lose faith in the war and sue for peace. Likewise, of course, the Union's goal early on, eventually, of course, the Union goal or method of squelching the rebellion eventually becomes a total war, right? You see that by 1864, following the Emancipation Proclamation, Sherman's March to the Sea, and the blockade of the South. Eventually, it becomes a total war. Early on, the goal was to really seize the capital of Richmond of the Confederate States and use the seizure of that capital as effectively a way to put an end to the rebellion. But of course, the job of the Union is probably early on a bigger job than the job of the Confederates, largely because the Union has to wage a more offensive strategy to quell a rebellion, whereas the Confederates' goal is largely to win enough victories to compel the North into suing for peace. Anyway, so that's our topic for this week. We're going to be looking at 1862, a period where the Confederate States were really, particularly with the Army of Northern Virginia, were particularly successful during the war, and where the Union had a great deal of difficulty finding capable leadership of its army. So the factoid for this week is this. The factoid is basically going to be test tense. So we have a test this week. The test covers all the material covered in the course thus far. It's a midterm exam. Of course, there's a major essay on there, and the major essay will ask you to basically be able to explain the historical process that led to disunion in several complete and concise paragraphs. When you write these essays, I want details, specific details. Show me you know what you're talking about. So please, under no circumstances should you pre-write and copy and paste into the test. I want to see you writing it as you take it, but certainly you can take notes, you can do an outline, and these types of things, but please don't copy and paste anything in. But the test, the essay is basically going to ask you to explain the factors that led to disunion and ultimately civil war, which is what we've kind of been talking about the entirety of this half of the term. Now, the factoid this week is this. There's three nice test hints. I'm giving you free answers here. So for those of you who are watching this, not only are you getting bonus points, but you're getting free answers. Here are the free answers, okay? These are questions right off the test. So first of all, this week or last week, week 5, we've been talking about, the concept amateurs go to war. And what McPherson means by that, this is a question for the test. What McPherson meant by that is not that the United States possessed zero military experience. There was a significant amount of military experience garnered from the Mexican-American War. There were hundreds of officers that had, experienced and served in the Mexican-American War. So it wasn't that they possessed no experience. It was the wrong kind of experience. That the experience in fighting in the Mexican-American War was not an experience that was similar to what the fighting would be like in the U.S. Civil War, where both sides all possessed, for each infantry officer possessed rifles, generally muzzle-loading rifles as opposed to the breech loaders, as we were learning about. Some breech loaders were used, but by and large, the infantry soldier all had muzzle-loading rifles, which were much more accurate than the smoothbore muskets that they would have encountered with their opponent in the Mexican-American War. Many of them were using the old British Brown Bess, as it was called. So they had experience, but it was the wrong kind of experience. It didn't translate into the kind of war they were fighting. So that's one question on the test. Another question on the test is, in the first battle, true or false, in the first battle of the Civil War, the first battle of Bull Run or Manassas, did the Union and Confederate armies look the way we tend to imagine they looked, with blues and grays? Did they all wear consistent uniforms? And of course the answer to that is no, false. They actually were kind of a hodgepodge of volunteers that came in, and they all had different types of uniform, some of them quite interesting looking, in fact. So that's another of the free answers. And the last free answer, and this is the one I want you to send me for the factoid, is this. And this was really interesting. The CSS Alabama. The CSS Alabama was what we would call a commerce raider. It was a Confederate ship. The ship was built in England, actually, and it was a commerce raider. It was a ship that was used by the Confederacy to attack Union shipping and to try to break the blockade that the Union was putting on the South. So the question for the test is that the CSS Alabama, what kind of ship was it? It was a commerce raider. Now here's a little extra bit related to the factoid that I want you to send me. The CSS Alabama was, first of all, built in England. Second of all, it never ported in a Confederate state port ever. despite being involved in commerce raiding. And the last interesting thing about it, guess where it was sunk? So the Alabama, which I believe was commissioned in service in 1862, it was sunk in 1864, and you probably wouldn't believe where it was sunk, or maybe you would. The CSS Alabama was sunk by a Union ship in the English Channel, just off the coast of Cherbourg, France. And so it speaks to the sort of international component of the Civil War. So there's some free test answers. Hopefully you're watching this, you're getting those bonus points. And a really interesting factoid, the CSS Alabama, a commerce raider, never ported in a southern port, despite being involved in commerce raiding, built in England, and ultimately sunk off the coast of France by a Union vessel. All right, guys, let's have a great week. Let me know if you have any questions. Let's have a great week.